All right, so for the wood, unlike other items, you're going to pre-draw detail that then kind of happens in the shading. You're going to do all of the wood, including the shading, off padding. So no padding, straight up on the tabletop. For the cylindrical pieces of wood, like this one, you would draw out the majority of the detail. The wood pattern, I look for cracks in the wood. Do you have any knots or tree rings? And then for some of you, like where it was cut, if you can see the edge of it, we're going to make it look more like a piece of wood, and we're going to add in the tree rings. So if the outside is oval, then your tree rings would also be, or cylinder or elliptical, then your tree rings would also be the same ellipses. And so some of them might be a little bit darker, a little bit thicker, a little bit close together, a little bit more spread apart. So you're going to start out with that. This one is a piece of wood that has the bark on the side, like the texture of the bark. And so I'll do that one last, but where it's cut, the top or the side, I would look for, can you see any tree rings? And then if you have a jaggedy kind of edge, I would look at how you have linear detail that comes off the contour outline detail. For this piece of wood, I just have like almost all lines. So I put in the major cracks in my piece of wood, like major areas, and then you're going to add in before you start shading. For this one, it is like, some of you might have it, the gray pieces of wood. It's actually like from my parents' big tree that my dad cut down. And so this is slightly different. And so I'm going to do all the linear ones. And then how many of you have like this type of wood, the gray kind that's all spotted? Anybody? Okay. So we'll do that one at the end too, because there's a couple of you. All right. But for all of them, if you can see where it was cut off, you're going to kind of find the center, and you're going to add, even if it's not very visible, we really want it to look like a piece of wood, you're going to add the tree rings to it. And then for wood that has like all the lines on it, the linear texture, you're going to look for major cracks that are in the wood and thicker lines that you can add first. And you can just use regular wooden pencil. And then you're going to look for darker areas. So you can do this with mechanical pencil as well, especially if you have tons of little lines. So wherever it's darker, so let's say for me it's like a little bit darker on this side where light's not hitting as much. It's a little bit darker on this side where light is being blocked. Or if it's more textured, you're just going to add more lines. So you want to keep it, go right up to the edge and kind of pull down. And you want to do like sweeping kind of motion of line. And so it's much darker over here. So therefore I'm just going to add more line. So if there's a shadowy part, then you're just going to add more line. So along this edge a little bit towards the bottom. So I'm going to do some short ones, some long ones, and wherever I originally placed the cracks in the wood, I'm always going to go over in all of my layers. And then it's a little bit darker, so I'm starting on the edge of the shell and pulling up so I can get like a clean line. There's a little more shadow in that location. And if it's fairly light, then I would hold your pencil in the middle or towards the end to make some of the lines, because you still want the texture to be there. It's the texture that makes it look like wood. Okay, so in here this is like a deep kind of crevice or crack. So then I'm going to add more extra. And then this top part's like a little bit lighter, so I'm just going to adjust my pressure. And then there's this piece here that's like kind of broken off, and so I'm going to create like a darker edge because it's darker than my leaf that's it's next to. This top part's lighter. And then it's like just kind of broken. So I'm going to do like little tiny controlled scribbling. It's called scumbling, where it doesn't really have a distinct shape. It's just little pieces, little chunks of wood. So if you're not sure, I just do like little scribbles. Okay, let me just do this part. Da, 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 da. Okay. So always add extra, and you're gonna try to go right up to the edge and pull down, or right up to the edge and pull up, trying to get clean edges as you go. Okay, then, so that's true on this one as well. We'll look at like where is it darker? Is it darker in this ring? Well, then I'm gonna add extra lines, and whenever let's say it's darker down here, I'm gonna go over my pattern. Okay, and then I'm still gonna add lines in the same direction, going right up to the edge, pulling away. And then here, usually where it's cut off, it's a little bit lighter. So I would just do one layer, and then your blender can do the rest of the work. So where it's really light, just do one layer. Then with blender, so unlike other items, you're not gonna blend in a circular motion because you wanna keep it liney. So you're gonna blend in the direction of line. And so this is very much like hair when we do your guys' self-portraits. So when we start shading self-portraits, I'll just tell you, like, just blend it like wood. And if it's streaky, that's okay. We want to keep it linear. All right, I'm just going to turn it so my arm is more comfortable. And I can use the whole side of the blender, something under my hand. I'm getting a clean edge next to my other objects. So this is very similar to the tabletop, if you did the tabletop for your paper bag drawing. Or you blend in the direction. And you want to gray it all down, and then this top part's a little bit lighter, so I'm going to touch blend in the direction. And then with mechanical pencil eraser or this pencil eraser, or you can trade your ID for the pencil erasers, like this kind with a little paintbrush on it, you're going to erase back out where it's lighter. And you want to erase streaky. And so a little bit on the top part, a little bit lighter. Okay, then we're not done. You're gonna do one more layer. So let's come back to our notes. So off padding, you wanna blend in direction of lines. So that's true. Let's say you're doing the tree rings. I'm gonna blend in the direction. So these are cylindrical shape, or it's a cylindrical shaped item. I'm gonna blend in the direction of the ellipse or the ovals, ellipses. I also erase in the same direction. Erase back out, so in the same direction. And then we're gonna add more lines in the darker areas. Since we're not like really shading the wood per se, you're adding texture that then becomes value. We're going to erase out highlights wherever light is hitting and lighter lines. So areas that are lighter. And then your last layer for refining is you're going to add another layer of lines and do not blend. And so again, you can use yellow wooden pencil. If your item is darker, maybe you want to use mechanical pencil. So in this last layer, I'm going to make sure I have like clean edges as well. I'm always going to go over any cracks or crevices because it's probably dark every time. Anywhere it's darker, I'm going to add another layer. And I'm trying not to press too hard because I'm not going to blend this one. And so I do like a few little slight texture marks with the lines. So again, wherever it's darker, add another layer. And so the more you add, the better. And then if it still looks kind of liney or streaky or striped, then I would go back and you can pull back out like where your highlights are again if you need to. All right, so for this type of wood, it's exactly the same. Like you're just gonna blend in the direction and then you erase out. For this type of wood, it's the same thing. All the lines you're blending in the direction, erasing out probably where the piece of wood's been cut. And then for texture for this one, so if you don't have bark, right now with the lights on, you're going to refine your drawing. So you're looking at your glass, leaves, and flowers. Can I clean up an area, etc. If you do have bark on your piece of wood, I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So since it's dark, you're going to use 6B, and you're still going to keep this off padding. I look for any major shapes that you can see. And so if you want to kind of pre-draw major shapes you can see in there, and I'm kind of like twitching my arm a little bit, like so your lines are not perfect because it's like layers. It's like the skin of the tree. So it's layers and layers of skin, little shapes. So if you can turn it into a shape, turn it into a shape. Okay. So, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's going to know what that piece of wood in front of you looks like. All right, so then holding your pencil horizontal, like using the side of the graphite, you're going to do like little scribbles, mostly in your contour lines and a little bit on top. And you want to hold it close to the tip of the pencil so you have like a lot of control. And you want to get like, what does the jaggedy edge kind of look like at the top, sides, etc. Okay. So you do want to leave white because then your blender is going to do the rest of the work for you. So I'm going to blend, but not with a lot of pressure because I want to keep the texture of the pencil. And I just want to kind of gray it all down. So I'm blending, but not pressing very hard. Because we want layers of value. But you want to make sure there's no white showing. Okay. Then I would do another layer. And if you want to be more precise, like if there's any actual cracks you can see, you can put those in there. I tend to just like do another scribbly kind of layer. If you've lost the shapes that you drew, you can add them back in. Scribble a little bit on top. Okay. Kind of another. And this one you would use circular, a little bit of a circular motion. Okay. Then if you actually have, the best eraser really is if you still have this eraser, but if you don't, use this one. Wherever it's lighter, usually on the top layer, you're going to kind of just like blot or touch out where it's lighter, like where light's coming from, highlights. But lighter is relative because it's a dark area. So that's how you would do texture. You just want to make sure it's much darker. Like I look at how much darker the bark is compared to the lines and then the tree rings. And for these especially, notice how there's like 3 ranges of value. Medium, light, dark. Okay. All right, so then if you have the gray piece of wood, the fig tree wood that's out there, this one is a little bit different, but there are lines on there. So if you can see them initially, I would add them. And the first thing I kind of start with is where are the little speckles, like little knots in the wood. And it's fairly light, so I'd use 2B pencil. And you're going to add any lines or texture that you can see. And we're going to shade a little bit for form on this one, just because there's not a lot of detail. So holding my pencil horizontally, I'm going to kind of tap around where all the little knots are. looking at, okay, I do see like a few lines, a little tree ring. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you are going to kind of want to do some observing to see like where the speckliness is. Just kind of tapping your pencil. I'm going to add in some of the lines I can see, and I'm trying to stay fairly light because it's a light gray. Okay, so this one you are going to shade a little bit for form. So for me, it's darker like along this edge because light's coming from the top side. So along the edge, I'm going to kind of clean up my edge a little bit too. I'm going to add a little bit of value. And this is like a little tree branch sticking out. I'm going to look for any darker value behind that so it comes forward. Okay. So this one you are just going to kind of blend over a little bit, like circular or linear. So kind of liney, but circly a little bit. So a mixture between directions. So just like with anything, with the pieces of wood, all the different types, your first layer is your most important layer. If you spend some time really looking at the piece of wood, adding in major details, drawing all the pattern of the line, it's like less work you have to do at the end. Okay, so for this one, I would definitely trade your ID for the pencil erasers. So where it's cut or has the tree rings, it's usually lighter, so I'm going to erase out in the direction. Pull out any highlights. And that skin I can kind of see like linear little wrinkles in the skin of the tree, the bark. And if you see any light areas in the shadow part, you can do that. I'm going to go back, and where it's kind of speckly, I'm going to kind of blend over to soften the little dots, make them fuzzy. And then I would do one last layer with mechanical, and then I wouldn't blend. And really it'd be like refining edges and adding some of your darker values. There's like this darker edge. So if you have questions, obviously ask, because each piece of wood is slightly different because they're individuals. But the process is generally the same. And then if you need to, if it looks like too textury, more subtle, you can erase back out. I'm gonna pull back out my highlight. Okay, so that piece of wood, it's fairly subtle and it's fairly light. So I'd really, before you start on any of the pieces of wood, ask yourself, how light or dark is it compared to other things? And then adjust or add more or less lines accordingly. All right, I'm gonna leave that. Let's see, can I get all of this in one view? Maybe. I'll chop off that part so you guys can have all of it in one view. All right, so once you have refined glass, you have perfected and refined flowers and leaves, you're moving on to your piece of wood. Tomorrow's the shell, so don't move on, but if you are done, get your items checked. And then if you have other items that you have questions about before shell and cloth, then let me know.